live. I'm alive and live. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sora, by the way, and everybody on that panel. Fantastic conversation. Some serious brains at work there. Really enjoyed that. Next is a very special guest. I've asked personally to talk to me for a while. Hasn't sponsored this conference or anything. This is just because I've known Jesus Mantas for a very long time, and he's a very lovely guy, and I've enjoyed working with him a lot. And you know, over the course of the last year, I think many of you who know Jesus know that he's been sick, but he's recovering a lot now, which is great to see. He's got his hair back and all that sort of stuff. So I really wanted to get him at the session to share a little bit about maybe himself, and also about this concept of unselfish, authentic leadership that we've been talking about during some great conversations. So maybe, Jesus, would you like to just reintroduce yourself to the group and tell us a little bit about what makes you tick these days, and then we'll get into some of this leadership conversation.
Lovely to be here. It's always great to talk to you. It's a lot better feel when we get to share a meal in the UK. So hopefully we'll be doing that soon. About me, I was born and raised in the south of Spain, in a city called Granada. So, you know, educated in public school. And the main gift that my parents gave me was not money, but an education. They worked really hard to send me to Madrid. I studied engineering in telecommunications and software. And I was always, from a very age, I was always very interested on the application of technology to do something that would matter. Little known fact of myself is since I was 3 years old until I was roughly 15 years old, I was certain that I would be a medical doctor. Certain. Every one of my toys, so all my Christmas toys, had something to do with human biology because I was fascinated about the complexity of the biological systems. And I was always intrigued to solve puzzles that were very complicated. I was raised on a situation in Spain where the education system was so good that there were surgeons driving taxis, because there was so many like great doctors that there wasn't enough. There wasn't a private healthcare system. It was just a public healthcare system. So there was only so many jobs. So that's what led me to say, like, okay, I don't want to study 10 years and not have a job. Then what do I do next? That involves complex systems. I went into technology, but I was always fascinated on the application of technology. I came to the US to learn English. I think of all people, you probably would say big mistake. Like, you don't go to the United States to learn English. You go to the United States to learn American. But I figured that it was a good time in my career. I was at the time at Procter & Gamble. So I was working with at the very early stages of the ERP cycle. Those who have been long enough in the SAP world will remember the SAP R2 systems. Those were the mainframe-based SAP systems. That's what I was doing for Procter & Gamble. And I came to the US with the intention of just having more experience, be open, and learn the language, because, you know, I always envied that. That was 1994, October 1994, and I'm still here. The joke goes, well, I'm still learning the language. I haven't quite done that well. But that the reason why I told that background is, you know, come relevant in a second, is what I've always been passionate about since I was 3 years old. It's still true today. To when I came to the US, I learned something on my own that I never had a concept of, which was diversity and inclusion. I you know, living in Spain, I was like everybody else. I didn't have a concept of that. And then coming to the US, I learned that I would be judged not on what I could do, but on the way I would speak and the way I would look like and the way that I would behave. So the famous phrase from Steve Jobs that whether we like it or not, people will judge a book by covers, became very personal to me. And that was one of the items that led to me to say, wow, you know, this concept of leadership is a lot more complicated than I always thought. As an engineer, you always kind of dismiss anything other than the numbers, because the formulas just tell you what the answer is. But then when you deal with people, that becomes insanely more complicated, right? What's right or wrong becomes a function of the context. So that led me to, my cycle was I spent 3 years at Ernst & Young. Then I joined Pricewaterhouse in 1997 as a manager. That was a good move, surrounded of great people. I made partner in 3.5 years from manager. So was one of the youngest partners. 2002, IBM bought us. And then I found myself, by no choice of my own, in a company called IBM that I truly thought I would just stay 2 years and then do something else. I mean, if I'm honest. And now it has been almost 20 years, right, that I've been in IBM. And I think what has been fascinating about IBM, one, they do care a lot about diversity and inclusion. So that has given me a platform to do things, especially for the Hispanic community in the United States. That has been rewarding. But two is like every 2 to 3 years, I have had, the equivalent of like running a new thing, running a new startup, running a new challenge that it was audacious in its scope. And it required the combination of engineering or technology and, my business consulting background. And putting those two things together is kind of like what I have done ever until now. I think you and I met when I was just recently appointed. I was running Latin America, and 2014, I was given the challenge to figure out what to do with the BPO business of IBM, since we had sold half of it, right? So we had sold the CRM BPO and was given, what do we do with the rest of it? And that's when I realized, well, the labor arbitrage model is kind of like done. So the next thing is going to have to be digital first, but digital first in a way that it will be human first. And I kept asking everybody, every analyst around, who is best at using design thinking for BPO? And everybody other than you told me that I didn't know what I was talking about. You were the only one that picked up that call and said, I think you're onto something. I think this point of using design thinking, human centricity, consumerize what we do in BPO, which were concepts non-existent in 2014. I think that's going to be very important for adoption, because in 2014, everybody, was doing BPO just because they had to, not because they wanted to, right? So that was kind of like the journey how you and I met. And since then, I led that business. I led the strategy that created business consulting, which was putting together the BPO unit and the consulting unit all together, is what today Paul Papas lead, and we call it a business transformation services. And in this journey in the last 3 years, I found my passion on biology back, and I was lucky enough to be admitted to the board of directors of Biogen. Especially neurology and neuroscience is something that I've been very fascinated for the last 10 years. And today is a very good week for us, as many of you guys know. FDA approved on Monday the first drug for the treatment of Alzheimer's in 20 years. And it was something that I was an spectator. I wasn't, my hands were not on it, but I had a privileged seat on seeing how that company did that and what it takes actually to put together the complexity of biology and technology.
Fantastic. So you went on a trip to Bhutan, I think, not too long before the pandemic, and one of the poorest countries on earth. I think they had their first death from COVID just after a year. But one of the mindsets you were telling me, typical in business, is managing on the resources to deliver an outcome. So what did the I'm going to share a few pictures as well here. What are the meetings you had there? How did that inspire you on this authentic leadership, unselfish leadership terminology?
Yeah, it was. This came about. There was a nascent, very small startup called Abroad that was coming up with this concept of, maybe we take some remarkable people, and sometimes it takes the theory behind is the environment has a lot of influence on who you become and what you do and how you perform. That is true in teams. That is true in companies, right? So but everything that we have in the company is almost designed to intervene on the individual, right? The performance management is on the individual. The progression management is on the individual. So like, what is the person does? What is, there's not a lot that says like, well, how's the environment? You know, how is the culture? Now everybody talks about culture, right? Everybody says like the culture is very important, but everything that we do is not about that. And what fascinated me about going to Bhutan was this concept that their own government measures their success, not only on GDP, which, you know, they do measure that, but they measure gross happiness index. So they measure their efficiency as to how happy are our citizens. And I thought like, wow, that is kind of interesting. I want to learn more about it. So it was my anxiety to learn more about that. That took me there for 7 days. I don't think I've taken 7 days to do anything in a long time. So I went there with a group of like remarkable people from many different backgrounds. And we spent 7 days. And what I learned is 2 or 3 things that I brought back to my day job in IBM. First one, it was this simple, very simple adjustment that you can make on your brain is when you're a leader, you believe that your focus is to use scarce resources the best way possible to optimize an outcome, right? So if it is your team, every day you're managing what your team is going to do. What are their priorities? What are they going to use their time? What are they going to use their money? How am I going to spend this budget? It's always the majority of your time as a leader is to basically make decisions based on scarcity. And therefore, what you basically say is like, what is it that I need to do with my scarce resources to optimize my goal? What I learned from the Bhutanese is the Bhutanese get up every day and they just kind of like look around and they say, what is that the world needs the most from me today? So, and the world could be my village. What is that my village needs? What is that my family needs? What is that my business needs the most from me today? So their leadership is more about them doing something that has a positive impact versus managing what they have in front of them. And I thought that was a very simple but fascinating way to make a difference, to switch yourself from a fixed mindset, which is managing scarcity, and a growth mindset, which is seeing possibilities. So I took that and I said, well, charity starts at home. So what if I start myself doing that? What is it that I can do on my own team with my own people? And we started that. The first thing that happened is our engagement went massively up with our own team. And I guess my team can actually tell if I'm telling the truth or not. They actually told me they saw a remarkable difference in myself. They basically said, we just cannot believe how different you, Jesus, after that are with respect to us, and how much they believe that my job is to help them be great. My job is to put them in the right opportunities so they don't fail. And again, the mindset that when you have that put you on is, if somebody's performing poorly, it's not like they're bad, it's maybe you as a leader put them in a situation that they were not equipped for. So it is your job to move them. It's not kind of like, don't blame it on them. I think that becomes, obviously it has limits. Sometimes, you know, the problem is the individual and you have to deal with that. But I think just testing first, what is it I'm going to do for the team versus what is it I'm going to do to be the first in the picture, right? It's like the first in the picture, and my team is in the background, to just be, no, I want like every one of them to be the actor in the picture. And I just want to be the executive producer. I just want to be the person that is getting the money, that is getting the capabilities. I think that served us very well during the pandemic. That has served us very well to change deeply held beliefs in the IBM company. For example, as to whether capital should be spent on services acquisitions, right? So you've seen that we've now done like 5 acquisitions in 5 months, but we didn't do that 3-4 years ago. So it becomes very helpful because suddenly if you adopt that growth mindset and you kind of like figure out what the limits are, and it's always a combination of both leadership styles, then you're not limited to the team that you organizationally have. You basically are relevant to anybody. In my case, I'm relevant to anybody in the IBM company or outside of the IBM company, all of our ecosystem partners. every time I ask, what is it that I can do for you? They believe that they're in my team. So in a way, you basically, your team becomes kind of like limitless in a way when you adopt that. What you can achieve is a lot bigger. And actually people grow a lot faster. I keep joking that if I would retire tomorrow, I don't think anybody would miss me. And I think instead of being afraid of that, I think that is such kind of freedom for me to figure out what is the next thing of value that I can be doing, because I don't need to be tied to like running whatever is running today. It's like my team just runs everything. And I just make sure that whatever I see there's going to be a rock in the way, I'm the one taking the rock, so they don't need to worry about it.
Good. So I got a final thing I'd love to say, love you to talk about is when you made some good friends when you were in Bhutan, and then they found out you were sick last year. What was it they did to give you some spiritual guidance?
Yeah, it was, I mean, more than spiritual, it's like, I'm not Buddhist, and I was intrigued about learning about it, but, I don't have any association with that religion. I was, as you can imagine, like 98% of Spaniards of my age, we were raised Catholic. But I think it was very interesting when they found out. Again, they got up that day and they said, what is it that we could do for Jesus today? But they didn't tell me that. They just went and did it. So they figured out, they went after the most sought after, Buddhist master in Bhutan. And they told him about me, and in the way that they do their ceremonies, they said, okay, well, we're going to do a ceremony of long life. And here's what the ceremony means. And we're going to have 1,000 monks actually going through this like week-long or like day-long ceremony. And each of them are going to, sing 1,000 prayers. And then we're going to get 2 other monasteries. So 2 monasteries in Bhutan, 1 monastery in India, basically from this time to this time, because that is what they felt they could do for me. They said, and they sent me a WhatsApp, literally, they sent me a WhatsApp that they said, Jesus, we know you are focused on getting the best medical doctors. So we are going to focus on getting you the best spiritual support. The only thing you need to do that they asked me to do is like at this date, which is when we're going to start, we ask you to meditate for 10 minutes. And then when we end, then meditate for 10 minutes. And then I said, and we are confident that you're going to be cured. And the context of all of this is that I was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. Basically, not even a year ago, right? 11 months ago. So I was going through this serious journey, and they said, like, don't worry, you're going to be fine, because you're going to take care, you yourself are going to take care of having the best medical doctors. But what we can do for you is to do that. And think about that. This is some people that I just met on a trip for 7 days. It's not like we have this long-term relationship, but it was touching and it was very meaningful. And it was, for me, it was like what authentic leadership feels like, when they do it to you. It's like when somebody says, what is it they can do for you? And because they believe that it can help you, right? I thought it was a great reminder and a great kind of responsibility for me to say, well, now that I know what it feels like when somebody does it to me, I want to make sure that, in an equivalent, when I promote somebody, like it's on me that they're successful. When I give somebody a job, if they don't have the training, I better give them the best training possible, right? If I ask somebody to do something, we'll give them performance that they can actually achieve. If you know today that they're not going to achieve it and in 6 months they're going to fail, then that's on you. That's not on them. Right?
Thank you for sharing that. It was wonderful. And we could go on, but we're way over time. But I think everyone wanted to hear what you had to say. And really, really appreciate you coming back here. I think you got more hair than me now. So, and looking forward to you being invigorated back into the business community very soon, and just really miss our conversations. So, and you could have been the first Buddhist called Jesus, right? So.
That would be quite interesting. Yeah, I don't know how it translates, but one of the things I would like to do in a minute or less, Phil, if you let me, for your audience, is
Sure.
I always like these things to be very pragmatic, right?
Yeah.
So as a lot of people do a lot of like feel good kind of like speaks, and I'm the first critic. They say, well, that's great, but what do I do Monday morning? So as part of this process, I actually wrote a blog and I said, what did I learn that is useful in a very pragmatic way, not in a very feel-good way? It's like, kind of like the engineering side, my left brain taking over and say, yeah. Okay, right brain, you have your time. Now, give me a checklist. And I wrote these 5 things that I think, again, if they're useful, great, use them. If they're not useful, then I only wasted you a minute, which is, one is like the meaning of words. A lot of people during the pandemic use the word resilience. And somebody taught me that that could actually be a very bad word, because resilience assumes when you're going through any kind of trauma, resilience means that going back to the way you were is the maximum you can do. Like the best thing you could do is just go back the way you were. And it doesn't leave possibility that maybe this trauma creates an opportunity for something so much better that you couldn't have imagined, right? And you and I have talked about it, how this trauma for many businesses have actually created a digital condition that is way better than anything prior to the pandemic. So you would not want to go back to the way of the pandemic. So resilience sometimes is the wrong word. Think about that. Second one is for that to work, people say, okay, let's create growth mindset. Well, you cannot create growth mindset unless one of your key leadership skills is imagination, right? Without imagination, you cannot create a growth mindset, because the growth mindset goes against everything your brain is designed to do, genetically. Genetically, you're supposed, when you see a trauma or a fear or a potential threat, your brain is telling you fight or flight, right? And a growth mindset is basically saying, in the face of something that is a problem, you're supposed to look around and see something that is so much better. You cannot do that without imagination. So to be a great leader, make sure that you strengthen that imagination. Mention that I said is like, when you do this servant leadership, you can expand the definition of who your team is. So that gets you a lot more, it's almost like a superpower to get things done. A lot of people talk about culture, but you cannot implement cultures. Cultures is a consequence. Culture is an outcome. The things that you can do as a leader is to change habits, right? So habits every day is what eventually become a culture. So when somebody tells you, let's create a different culture, just rephrase that and say, okay, what are the 3 habits that starting tomorrow we're all gonna adopt? And maybe 6 months from now, that will reflect on a new culture. And then the last one from my, neuroscience is when you don't know what else to do, if you're in a tough spot, just smile. It is neuroscientifically proven. We have these things called mirror neurons that are targeted to, we cannot communicate physically an emotional stage. There is no such a thing as emotional waves. So we signal, and then we have the brain mirror neurons that interpret what they're seeing and then recreate that emotional state, right? So it's kind of like a recreating thing. So when you smile, not only it's a connection on the brain that when you're happy, you smile, but then Pavlov proved that it works the other way around. When you smile, you actually trigger that happiness, not only on yourself, but also on everybody else. So again, statistically it's proven, you can read about it, it's called the happy face advantage. People who are naturally born with a face with more smile are more successful in life, just because the environment they create around that. So if nothing else you get out of this pitch, just when you don't know what to do, smile, because statistically you're gonna do
that. I'm trying. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jesus. Look forward to seeing you soon and really appreciate the time today.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil.
Cheers.